I was driving along the suburban highway, relishing the soft melodies emanating from the radio and anticipating the reunion with my mother. After 2 years of service abroad, I would finally be able to embrace her. The last time we met was at my father's funeral, and since then, our communication had been limited to video calls. In the back seat lay a bag filled with her favorite pastries from the very bakery, Joe's, that we frequented during my childhood. Old Joe still ran his establishment, and upon seeing me this morning, he broke into a smile. "Marcus, goodness, how you've grown. I still remember you sitting here with your mother, devouring my cinnamon rolls." The day was remarkably pleasant, sunny yet not overly warm. It was typical spring weather for North Carolina. I had deliberately chosen this route, skirting Raleigh from the north. There was always less traffic here, and the scenery was more picturesque. Neat farmlands, small groves, and the occasional roadside shop drifted by. Everything felt so peaceful and familiar, a stark contrast to the places where I had spent the last 2 years. I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The dress uniform fit impeccably. Each medal, each bar on my chest bore its own story, its own cost. The 2 stars on my Major General's epaulets were the culmination of 25 years of service, hundreds of operations, and thousands of lives under my command. My mother always remarked that the military uniform made me resemble my father, and today I had donned it specifically for her. "Damn," I muttered, noticing the flashing blue lights in the rearview mirror. I was absolutely certain I had not exceeded the speed limit. The cruise control was set precisely at the permitted 65 miles per hour, and the traffic was so sparse that there was no reason to break the law. Activating my turn signal, I gradually pulled over to the shoulder, turned off the engine, and placed my hands on the steering wheel, as standard procedure dictated. Over the years of service, I had enough interactions with law enforcement, and I always treated them with respect. We all served a common purpose. Through the mirror, I observed the police officer leisurely exiting his vehicle and approaching me. There was something about his gait that immediately unsettled me, an overly self-assured, almost aggressive manner of movement that I had learned to recognize over the years. Such a demeanor often betrays individuals who revel in their authority. "License and registration," the officer barked, not even bothering to greet me. I read his name on the badge, R. Baker. Young, probably around 30, with short-cropped blonde hair, a palpable tension in his stance, and a hard, almost hostile gaze. "Good afternoon, officer." I endeavored to speak calmly and respectfully, as my father had taught me. "May I inquire as to the reason for the stop?" Baker ignored my question. I said, "License and registration." Quickly, his hand ostentatiously rested on his holster, a gesture that seemed entirely unnecessary in this situation. "Of course, sir. The documents are in the glove compartment. I will retrieve them now." I slowly reached for the glove box, striving to make all my movements smooth and predictable. "Stop!" Baker shouted, now openly placing his hand on his firearm. "Hands where I can see them." I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from rising indignation. This was clearly an inappropriate reaction to a routine stop. "Officer, I am a general in the United States Army. Here is my identification." I gestured toward the documents on the dashboard. In the mirror, I noticed a passing car slow down. "I don't care who you claim to be. Get out of the car." Slowly, his voice carried notes of barely concealed contempt that I could not overlook. I took a deep breath, feeling my blood begin to boil. After all my years of service, following countless combat operations and international missions, I had never encountered such blatant disrespect on my own soil. Yet my military training had taught me to maintain composure in any situation. I recalled the words of my first commander, "A true officer retains dignity even when attempts are made to strip it away." "Sir, I comply with your order, but I must point out that I see no reason for—" "Shut up and get out. Last time I'm telling you." His face flushed with anger, and in his eyes, I saw something that made me wary. It was the gaze of a man ready for violence, seeking a pretext for its application. I slowly opened the door and stepped out of the vehicle. The sun gleamed brightly off the metals on my chest. I was clad in full dress uniform. I had specifically worn it for my meeting with my mother, knowing how proud she was of my service. Now, however, this uniform, a symbol of honor and service to my country, seemed almost mocking in this absurd situation. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed another car had stopped. A middle-aged woman emerged and began recording the unfolding events on her phone. Somewhere deep within, I felt a sense of gratitude for this. Witnesses in such situations are never unwelcome. Hands on the hood, feet apart, Baker commanded, advancing closer. An almost palpable wave of aggression emanated from him. "Officer, this is a clear violation of protocol. I demand." I attempted to appeal to his professionalism, but to no avail. "On the hood," I said, he barked, forcefully shoving me against the car, clearly attempting to provoke resistance. By this point, a small crowd had gathered on the shoulder. I could hear people murmuring among themselves, shaking their heads in disapproval. "Just look at what he's doing to a serviceman," someone exclaimed indignantly. "This is sheer madness," another voice added. "Officer Baker," I pronounced clearly and loudly, ensuring the witnesses could hear. "I am Major General Marcus Anderson, commanding." "Shut up," he snapped, twisting my arm behind my back with unwarranted force. "Do you think just because you're in uniform, you can act smart?" I felt the cold metal of the handcuffs press against my wrists. 25 years of impeccable service, 2 stars on my epaulets, a chest adorned with medals, and here I was, pinned against the hood of my own car while some provincial cop flaunted his authority. A fleeting thought of my mother waiting for me any moment now crossed my mind, and I imagined her dismay upon learning of this incident. "Hey, what's going on here?" A new voice rang out, authoritative and confident. I couldn't turn my head, but I heard the sound of rapid footsteps approaching. In that moment, I reflected on how many times my comrades and I had risked our lives in hot zones, defending American values and freedoms. How ironic it was that now, on my own soil, I stood humiliated and powerless, becoming a victim of precisely what I had always fought against: unjust violence and abuse of power. "I asked, what is happening here?" the commanding voice repeated. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of uniformed trousers and polished boots. "Don't interfere. This is a police operation," Baker retorted, still holding me against the hood. "I am Lieutenant Michael Thompson, County Department, and I ask you once more, what the hell are you doing, Baker?" The grip on my arms loosened slightly. I sensed Baker growing anxious. His breathing became erratic. "Suspicious behavior, sir. Possibly illegal wearing of military uniform. Are you completely daft?" Thompson's voice dripped with open disdain. "This is General Anderson. His photograph hangs in the lobby of our department." I can't be sure." Baker began to panic noticeably, yet he did not remove his hands from my wrists. By this time, a considerable crowd had gathered. I counted at least a dozen people, many recording the incident on their phones. Someone was live streaming, commenting on the events. "The general is being treated like a criminal. Do you see those medals on his chest? This is simply disgraceful. Remove the handcuffs from him immediately," Thompson ordered. "But protocol requires." I said, "Immediately." Baker finally relented. As soon as the cuffs were removed, I slowly straightened up, squared my shoulders, and turned to face them. Years of military discipline were evident. Even after such humiliation, I stood tall, looking at my opponents with dignity. Lieutenant Thompson was an African-American man in his 50s, with graying hair and intelligent, attentive eyes. He regarded Baker as if he were an unpleasant insect. "General Anderson, I offer my deepest apologies for this incident," Thompson began. "Not to me, Lieutenant." I pointed to my uniform. "You are not apologizing to me. You are apologizing to this uniform in all that it represents." Baker stood with his eyes cast down, his face flushed with embarrassment. Where had all his bravado gone? Where was the aggression with which he had pointed at me just moments ago? "Officer Baker," I deliberately emphasized the word officer, "look me in the eye." He slowly raised his gaze. Fear was evident in his eyes, not for his career or the consequences, but the profound fear one experiences when their worldview crumbles before their eyes. "Do you see these medals?" I gestured to my chest. "This one is for the operation in Kandahar, where we rescued a group of local children from terrorists. This one is for coordinating a humanitarian mission after the earthquake in Haiti. And this one," I touched the Purple Heart, "is for the wound I sustained while covering my soldiers' retreat. Among them were whites, blacks, Latinos, and Asians. Do you know what united them? They were all Americans. And when the bullets whizzed overhead, no one asked about skin color or background." The crowd fell silent. Even the birds seemed to hush, as if listening intently to my words. "I have served this country for 25 years, I continued, enunciating each word clearly. "I have defended its values across the globe. And do you know what is most disheartening about today's situation? It is that you, a person who took an oath to protect and serve, have just betrayed everything for which my soldiers died." I didn't," Baker stammered, attempting to say something, but I raised my hand to stop him. "Today, you did not merely stop a vehicle. You exhibited the very behavior that tears our country apart. And do you know what else? You didn't even state the reason for the stop, because there was none, was there?" Lieutenant Thompson pulled out a notepad. "General, I would like to document your official complaint." At that moment, an elderly woman stepped forward from the crowd. She wore a simple dress and held a bag of groceries. "Excuse me," her voice trembled with indignation. "I recorded everything on video, from start to finish. My son was killed in Iraq. He served in the Marine Corps. And to see a police officer treat a combat general like this, I will send this video to all the news outlets." "Ma'am," I smiled gently at her, "thank you for your support and for your son's sacrifice. But right now, we need to resolve the issue, not escalate the conflict." I turned to Baker. "Officer, you have a choice. You can continue to live with your prejudices, allowing them to poison not only your life but the lives of others. Or you can use this moment as an opportunity for change. What will you choose?" A heavy silence hung in the air. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed by, but no one paid it any mind. All eyes were fixed on the young officer, who just 15 minutes ago had reveled in his authority, now standing like a chastised schoolboy before the man he had attempted to humiliate. "General," Baker finally spoke, his voice sounding entirely different. Gone was the ostentatious aggression, replaced by shame. I don't know what came over me. This is inexcusable. Everything is forgivable, my son." I intentionally used that term, except the unwillingness to learn from one's mistakes. "Baker," Lieutenant Thompson's voice broke the prolonged pause. "Surrender your badge and weapon. You are suspended pending further investigation." A myriad of emotions played across the young officer's face, from fear to despair. I had seen that look in young soldiers when their world crumbled before their eyes. "Lieutenant," I raised my hand, "allow me to propose an alternative." Thompson raised an eyebrow in surprise. "General, with all due respect, this man just—" "I know what he did," I interrupted. "Believe me, I am fully aware. My back still remembers the hood of my car." A few people in the crowd nervously chuckled. But suspension is not a solution to the problem. It is merely a punishment that will likely only deepen his prejudices. "What do you propose?" Thompson's voice held genuine curiosity. I glanced at my watch. My mother was surely starting to worry. But this moment was more important. After all, she had raised me to always do what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. "Officer Baker," I addressed him, "how long have you served in the police force?" 3 years, sir," he replied uncertainly. "And why did you join the police?" Baker paused for a moment. I wanted to help people, protect them. A noble goal," I nodded. "Now tell me honestly, when you saw me in the car today, what did you think?" "Only the truth." The crowd fell silent. Even those recording on their phones seemed to hold their breath. Baker swallowed hard. "I saw a black man in an expensive car, in a military uniform with medals. And I thought I thought it couldn't be true, that it must be some kind of deception. Why? Because, he faltered, clearly struggling with himself. Because in my worldview, it didn't fit. I grew up in a small town in Georgia. My father always said, "Stop," I interrupted him. "There it is. You just identified the root of the problem. Your worldview. It is too narrow, Officer Baker. And it is not entirely your fault. We are all products of our upbringing. But now you have a chance to broaden that perspective." I turned to Thompson. "Lieutenant, instead of suspension, I propose something different. Let Officer Baker undergo a month of internship at a veterans center. There, he will meet people of all races and backgrounds, united by their service to the country. Let him listen to their stories, learn about their journeys. And then, if you have no objections, I would like to personally conduct a few discussions with him." "You are too kind, General." Thompson shook his head. "No, Lieutenant. I have simply fought long enough to understand. The enemy is not the one who makes mistakes, but the one who refuses to learn from them." I took a business card from my pocket and handed it to Baker. "Call me in a week. We will start with a simple conversation about your childhood, why you became a police officer, your fears and hopes. And perhaps in the process, we will both learn something." Baker took the card with trembling hands. "I don't deserve such a chance, sir. And that is for me to decide, son," I smiled. "You know what I have learned over the years of command? Sometimes people need not punishment, but an opportunity to become better. And one more thing." I paused. "The very fact that you believe you do not deserve a chance is precisely what indicates that you do." The woman with the phone, who had been recording everything, suddenly spoke up. "But what about justice? He should be held accountable for his actions." "Ma'am," I turned to her, "justice comes in many forms. There is the justice of punishment, and there is the justice of correction. What is better for society? An embittered cop, suspended from duty and harboring resentment, or a person who undergoes transformation and becomes an example for others?" Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. I heard various opinions. Some supported my decision, while others deemed it too lenient. But I was more interested in Baker's reaction. He stood there, still holding my business card, and the internal struggle was evident on his face. "General," he finally spoke, "I want you to know, what I did today is not who I want to be. And if you are truly willing to give me a chance to change—" "Not to me," I corrected him again. "Give yourself a chance. I will simply help you on that journey." Lieutenant Thompson shook his head. "I never thought I would say this, but perhaps this unpleasant incident could lead to something good. Baker, do you realize how incredibly lucky you are?" "Yes, sir," he nodded. "And I." At that moment, my phone vibrated. It was my mother calling. I glanced at my watch. It had been over an hour since I was stopped. "I apologize, I need to take this," I said, pulling out my phone. "Lieutenant, I trust you can handle all the formalities? And you, Officer Baker, I expect to hear from you in a week. And please, send your regards to your father. Tell him his son met a man who believes people can change." I stepped aside to answer the call. Behind me, the crowd began to disperse, but I could hear them discussing what had transpired. Someone remarked, "Now that's a true leader. Not one who punishes, but one who teaches." "Mom," I answered the call. "Sorry, I got held up." "Yes, I'm fine. Actually, something interesting happened. I'll tell you when we meet. And you know what? I think you will be proud of me." An hour later, I finally arrived at my mother's house. She was waiting for me on the porch, and as soon as I stepped out of the car, she immediately sensed that something was amiss. "Marcus, dear, what happened? You look different," she said, embracing me in a way only a mother can, sensing that her child had experienced something significant. "Let's go inside, Mom. I'll explain everything." I kissed her on the cheek and retrieved the box of pastries from the back seat. They were slightly squished after the day's events, but still looked appetizing. We sat in her quaint kitchen, which had remained unchanged since my childhood. The same floral curtains she adored, the same old sideboard, photographs on the walls. Me at various stages of my service, my father in uniform, our family snapshots. Please don't tell me those pastries are from Joe. She smiled as she opened the box. Of course they are. He still remembers how I used to devour his cinnamon rolls. And do you remember how your father always said, Joe doesn't bake pastries, he bakes pieces of happiness? My mother retrieved her favorite cups, the ones with the golden rim that she only brought out for special occasions. I remember, Mom. And you know, today I understood more than ever why Dad was so principled. I began recounting the events of the day, how I was stopped, Officer Baker's behavior, the humiliation, and the choice I made in the end. My mother listened intently, not interrupting, only shaking her head occasionally and gripping her cup tighter. Have you seen this? She asked when I finished, handing me her tablet. The video of the incident had already garnered thousands of views. In the comments, people were fiercely debating. Some demanded Baker's immediate dismissal, while others praised my decision to give him a chance to redeem himself. The hashtag General Anderson Teaches Love had become a trending topic on social media. You know what's most interesting, Mom? As I drove to you, I thought about how proud I would feel appearing in my uniform, adorned with medals. But in the end, I realized that true strength lies not in the uniform or the rank. And what does it lie in, my son? In the ability to remain human even when treated like less than human. Dad always understood that, didn't he? My mother stood and approached the sideboard. She retrieved an old photograph. My father, also in uniform, stood alongside a group of young soldiers of various races. Your father commanded one of the first truly integrated units, she said. It was not easy. Some of his peers believed he was shaming the honor of the officer corps by accepting black soldiers as equals. Do you know what he told them? What, Mom? He said, a bullet does not distinguish between skin color, and neither does courage. At that moment, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Lieutenant Thompson. General, I apologize for the disturbance. Baker has requested to start his internship at the Veterans Center not next week, but tomorrow. He says he wants to use every day for change. You truly touched something in him. I showed the message to my mother. She smiled. He reminds me of you when you were younger. Do you remember how you once got into a fight at school with a boy who was bullying your friend Mike? I remember. And I remember how Dad scolded me not for fighting, but for choosing to solve the problem with force. He made you both come to our house and spent the entire evening telling stories about his service, about friendship, about prejudice. And that boy, Jim, became my best friend throughout school, I concluded. You know, maybe that's why I acted the way I did today. I suddenly saw in Baker's eyes that same frightened schoolboy who just didn't know another way to exist in the world. My mother walked to the window. Look at that beautiful sunset. Your father loved to say, the sun shines equally for everyone. We finished in unison and laughed. I took out my phone and typed a response to Thompson. Please tell Officer Baker that I am proud of his decision, and that I will be expecting him not only at the Veterans Center, but also at my home for Sunday dinner. My mom bakes an excellent apple pie. Are you sure, son? My mother asked, reading the message over my shoulder. More than sure. You know, over the years of service, I've learned a simple truth. Sometimes the strongest weapon against hatred is not condemnation, but a simple apple pie and a sincere conversation at the family table. My mother embraced me. Your father would be very proud today. I know, Mom. And you know what? I'm proud too. Not for holding back my anger or forgiving the insult, but for the possibility that today, we all became a little better. Baker, the people who recorded the video, and myself, outside, darkness had fully descended. Somewhere in the city, Officer Baker was likely sitting in his kitchen, perhaps talking with his family about how one day can change an entire life. And I sat with my mother, sipping tea with pastries from Joe, reflecting on the notion that sometimes the most important victories are not won on the battlefield, but in the hearts of people.